Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another random entry here. Once again focusing on an early gangster from the 1900s. In this case, someone that was operating there in the Midwest. So this was once again also a little to well-known gangster, and what's interesting is that his criminal activities actually involved black hand operations too. Something that I've mentioned within some of my past videos as well. Him operating through the Midwest just goes to show yet again that at certain points in the U.S. there was practically no area safe from mafioso type activities. Like no matter how big or how small certain locations were, you had the organized crime of the mafia operating there. But it has to do with this. You're looking at the guy now. His full name was Rosario Giuseppe Borgio, but interestingly enough, he had no nickname. So in this case, we'll just go with his full name for the video. And again, that's Rosario Giuseppe Borgio. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating but brief information associated with this gangster, including providing details on him ultimately being executed by electrocution because of his crimes. So who was this Rosario Giuseppe Borgio? Well, he was someone that was born back on January 18th, 1861. Very little, though, is known with regards to his early life. I couldn't even see any information as to where he was born or when he immigrated over, like let's say if he was born overseas. What we do know is that sometime in the early 1900s, he eventually settled in Akron, Ohio. In fact, it pretty much read that once he settled there, that became his main area, his main front when it came to setting up his organized crime operations. And then also, just like I mentioned with some of my other past videos, he too set up a front of sorts, something that would at least showcase to the public that he was a legitimate businessman. And I use that in quotations. Like this was just someone that was just using this front to be able to pass by and do all his other illegal activities from behind, such as the case here. Apparently he operated a very successful general goods store. I think you're actually looking at it here, and he operated within the second floor, and I think within one of the back areas of the store as well. He also lived not just within the store but right above it as well. But yes, he used this to begin his criminal operations. There was some 2 back rooms as well that he used for it. But again, for anyone else not paying the wiser when they were walking by, all they would see is this guy, Rosario Borgio, and there he was successfully running that general goods store. It's pretty smart when it comes to that, because again, you would have to have more concrete proof that he was doing anything illegal, but he definitely had a fort of sorts built within that place. He knew that eventually if something would come down, like let's say law enforcement or maybe even rival gangs would decide to try to do something to him at that store, he had what he called an extensive security system set up. Get this, apparently not just on the front, but on the back stairs area, he had special alarms. I have no idea what kind of alarms they were. If I had to guess, considering the time period, it would have involved drawstrings or maybe some levers that would be hit that would probably sound some manual alarms, and then that way he'd know that somebody was coming forward. And into those stairs, he actually had trip pits set up. So in other words, areas that people would accidentally step on and they would fall down. Like obviously it was a false floor of sorts, but right there, almost like Indiana Jones style, in the bottom of those pits were foot-long steel spikes. Can you believe that? These spikes were just buried right there on the bottom, so that way if anybody fell through them, they would essentially be impaled multiple times over. And then also he had a very, very rigid steel solid door. No doubt it was there to prevent someone from getting in while he was being, I guess, safe within some kind of safe room. And he also had a very, very large arsenal of weapons, which included rifles, rifles, pistols, shotguns, and then get this, submachine guns. So probably Tommy style too. So it goes to show again, there was the classic storefront in the front showcasing him, and then as a businessman for the community, no doubt all smiles, and then you had everyone else on the inside as the workers who probably did or didn't know what was going on overall, but at least they were working on the front side of the store, and then on the back there he was operating all his shady activities. Such of those activities included this: illegal gambling, prostitution. He also had political protection as well, and he did this because by that point in the 1910s, he was able to use black hand operations. In fact, he controlled black hand operations within that specific area. This black hand stuff was no joke. Like, this was the kind of stuff that was pretty bad, pretty sinister. It involved mainly extortion, the idea that people would get these random letters in the mail, or probably stapled, I guess, to their door, however they were found, and they were clearly telling the person reading it, because they were no doubt aimed at a certain person, usually someone with some kind of money, that if they did not present a certain amount of money at a certain date, at a certain location, then physical harm would come to them, and that's taking it lightly. On the darker side, it would involve much worse stuff. That's all it was, basic extortion, and if they didn't get their way, then it would involve kidnapping, and then it would involve death. And the Black Hand was known to target prominent business people, people that were in showbiz, and then even people within the community, those that had some kind of money as well. And I believe they also picked on immigrants who knew, especially Italian immigrants, those that knew that they were there maybe legally or illegally, and they had little to no protection that as far as these type of extortion attempts. And so they would make sure that the money was paid, and that's just how bad the Black Hand was. Well, this guy, Rosario Borgio, was definitely a bad guy because he was involved with those operations and no doubt making a good amount of money associated with it. With that political protection, he also had some backing, and so he was able to do it on a successful level. Interestingly enough, though, even though he had those politicians in his back pocket, the police force there in Akron were free. Like, in other words, they were not in part of his type of bribery. They were not part of his schemes. They were free of that type of corruption. And by that point in 1918, they actually began raiding all of his areas that he did his illegal crime operations. For example, they did in his gambling dens, and then he had some brothels there as well. They would arrest not just the people working there, quote unquote, but also the clients that were there too. If you could imagine, especially on the brothels, what kind of scene that would play out. But eventually it got to a point where so much of this was happening, and it was disrupting Rosario Borgio's business activity, his illegal business activity. He responded by holding a meeting with his fellow Black Hand members, and he declared war on the Akron police force. He offered anyone a bounty of $250 for the police officers to be killed within that city. Yes, you read that right. He actually offered a bounty for anyone to kill the police officers. That's how mad he was about the situation, that he was wanting to kill the entire police force within the town itself. And the way it worked is almost like randomly, there were these patrolmen, starting with Patrolman Robert Norris. He was ambushed and killed on December 26, 1918. Some citizen, poor unfortunate citizen, found him, and he was apparently shot several times in the back. And then afterward, there was another set of patrolmen, Edward Costigan and then Joe Hunt. They were just on their random patrol, and then they in turn were shot and killed. And then another officer, Gethin Richards, was killed afterward, after a couple of days as well. Obviously, the police were wondering what was going on. They had this streak of crimes happening against their patrolmen, but they had no idea what was causing it, like who was behind it. And that was because no money was taken, so there was no robbery, and then there was no evidence as far as other types of motives associated with the actual murders, especially considering the random locations that these things seem to be happening. They actually thought it was a serial killer that was out there on the loose, but lo and behold, on one day, one fateful day, eventually, the chief of detectives, a guy by the name of Harry Welsh, he received a phone call, an anonymous one, from a woman. Who knows who this woman was, but she definitely put her life on the line doing so. I mean, she was someone that, no doubt it was somebody that knew the dangers involved, but still, she decided to make the phone call. She stated that she saw one of the murders happen, and when it occurred, apparently the murderer had a very identifiable scar on his hand. Who knows how that scar looked like, but it definitely must have made an impression, no. And so with that tiny little bit of information, eventually, a guy by the name of Lieutenant Michael Fiaschetti, who was the head of the NYPD's quote-unquote Italian squad, he was brought on board to begin an investigation. They wanted to see exactly what could be done with that little bit of info. And lo and behold, it took several months of this guy contacting informants, and then there was also surveillance of criminal hangouts, but eventually he received a tip back in January of 1919 that one of the people that could fit that description of someone who had that scar would be hanging out at a so-and-so pool hall. And so there he was, Lieutenant Michael Fischetti, right there the night before, hanging out by that pool hall. And as he did so, that's when he saw a guy by the name of Tony Manfredi, and then another guy, a guy by the name of Pasquale Biondo, playing pool. And then when he looked, he realized that this guy, one of them, in other words, Manfredi, had a revealing scar on his hand. So who knows if that scar at least was that detailed to know that, yes, that was him. That was the person that had committed one of the murders associated with the police officer. But it was enough for this guy, Lieutenant Michael Fiaschetti, to be able to arrest them and then escort them all the way back. We're talking from New York City all the way back to Akron, Ohio by train. And then during that very long ride, even though those two guys remained very silent, eventually he was able to get one of them, I guess, into a separate area, like a lounge car of sorts. And when he did so, he was kind of almost bribing him with drinks. He was able eventually to convince that guy that the other guy would eventually kill him. And so this guy, Manfredi, was drinking his drinks. This guy, Lieutenant Michael Fiaschetti, was convincing him that his partner, this guy Biondo, would kill him if he stayed silent. And that's when he spilled the beans. That's when he basically told that lieutenant everything that was involved, and that eventually led to information about Rosario Borgio, what he was doing in Akron, how he was involved with the police murderers, and then that led to his conviction. And when that happened, he was eventually executed. He was sent to the electric chair, and on May 22nd, 1919, that was it. That was the end of the life of Rosario Borgio. Isn't that just the way things just linked all together? Here he was committing all these crimes within the Akron, Ohio area, and then there were the police essentially trying to stop him. He decided to take it to the next level by trying to have all the policemen murdered. One of them was able to do the murder, but he was have that scar, on his hand, identifying him afterward to a witness, and it was that anonymous witness that linked the two together. Otherwise, I dare say, if it wasn't for that single link, you would not have afterward Rosario Borgio electrocuted. He may still have been alive, at least living up to a natural death, but no, there he was on May 22nd, essentially being fried because of his declaration to kill all the police. I was very surprised when I read that too, because I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm assuming things too much on here, but it's almost like it's an unwritten rule that you do not go after police officers voluntarily, in other words, if you're in the mafia, because it just creates way too much heat. In other words, you're going to have so much trouble afterwards from the police force and law enforcement and anything involving the legal system. Everything just goes to another level when it comes to that. But here's this guy, Rosario Borgio, deciding to take things very personal, and that, of course, led to his eventual death. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with this Midwest gangster, Rosario Borgio. If anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. What about those of you there in Akron, Ohio? Have you seen any remnants? Maybe even that area where that general goods store, the one he operated in, who knows, that building may still be in existence. That store might still be there. No doubt operating as a completely different business. But if you've ever been at that location, then you'll know now that when you're in there, that's where Rosario Borgio was operating for at least some time period. A very successful set of organized crime operations. But again, that's pretty much it. That's all the information I have. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.